Hail and well met, friends. I'm Heraldry. This video is going to be the first in a series of videos on heraldry. What's it for? How does it work? Can you make your own? Let's get right into it. So heraldry is the practice of keeping and displaying insignia which represent a person, corporation, or municipality, specifically in regards to what is designed to be displayed on or around a shield. Okay, so first let's start with a name. What's this thing right here? Is it a coat of arms? Maybe it's a seal or a family crest. What about a banner or an achievement? Firstly, a coat of arms refers to a literal surcoat or tabard that heralds would wear when they are in court or fulfilling their heraldic duties. A seal is sometimes similar or identical, sometimes to a heraldic achievement, but the two words are different. A crest refers to a very specific part of this whole display, let alone the fact that, at least in most of Europe, heraldry represented an individual, not families. So we're just going to call the whole thing someone's heraldry, their arms, or heraldic or armorial achievements for the purposes of this video, though there are a few other terms we'll get into later on. So then, what's it for? Heraldry was developed around the 12th century, when knights began to wear full-faced helmets and full mail armor. It was actually getting quite hard to distinguish between friend and foe when wearing that level of kit. If a mailed knight was riding towards you at full gallop, you might not be able to see who he was until he was too late. Even in the Bayeux Tapestry, we see that Duke William had to take off his helmet to reveal his face to show that it was really him underneath all that armor, and that he was still alive. Contrary to popular belief, though, plate armor wasn't the reason for the invention of heraldry. Heraldry was around far before plate armor even existed. So how would the display of heraldry help with the identification of knights on the battlefield? Well, in the days before widespread literacy, a little old name tag wouldn't do you much good. Every knight had different arms, and you could memorize, or at least recognize, the arms of your allies and your enemies. Often knights from a certain region or family would have similarities in their arms so that you could tell that they had something in common. It wasn't all just arbitrary shapes and designs assigned to random people, although it certainly was a bit of that. Heraldry serves the purpose of identification, but why did it stay in use after people stopped wearing armor? That's an interesting question, and much of it really comes down to the inherent pageantry that comes with bearing arms. When a bunch of rich people have colorful, highly decorated, unique displays of their lineage and achievements, it quite easily lends itself to bragging. If you were a wealthy nobleman with a right to bear arms, you almost certainly would display your arms in several places around your house, whether it's on a shield hanging in the Great Hall, or simply as a stamp mark on your silverware or other belongings to denote them as your own. Heraldry is usually described using its blazon, which is a standardized system for describing heraldic designs. Instead of saying the shield has a black horse rearing up on its hind legs on a yellow field, you'd have to make it fit the pseudo-language of blazonry for better clarity's sake. Much of the vocabulary is a holdover from Norman French and Middle English, but it's the traditional way of recounting and describing heraldic designs. For instance, instead of the first example, you would write it as, or, a horse forcené, sable. Now, this may not make much sense to you, but we'll get further into it later on. It's actually a pretty solid system. So, knights used heraldry. Who else? Well, anyone born in noble birth certainly would have had the right to bear arms. Additionally, any king, lord, or heraldic authority could have granted arms to a common person, such as the case of John Hawkwood, a longbowman-turned-mercenary general during the 14th century. Marrying into nobility would have granted you the right to bear arms, and additionally, if both members of a couple were armigerous, it was common to combine or marshal them in some way. This is usually done via impalement, that is, splitting the arms in half and putting the husband's arms in the dexter half and the wife's arms in the sinister half. But this can have needlessly complicated rules, which are far beyond the scope of this video series. An unmarried armigerous woman would usually not bear her own arms on a shield. That was a man's device, an instrument of war. Instead, she would bear her arms on a diamond-shaped lozenge or a cartouche, which is an ellipse. There is one more social class that would have frequently had their own heraldry, that of the church. Because much of the clergy was nobility, many bishops, priests, and popes would have had their own arms. Ecclesiastical heraldry followed much the same rules, but tended to be noticeably different from secular heraldry, including much more religious iconography and following a very different aesthetic goal overall, which just shows how much a person's worldview could influence how they design their arms. But what about the little guys I hear you cry? Well, common soldiers going into war would not bear their own personal arms, but would often bear the arms of the territory or municipality they're fighting under. For instance, an English footman might bear St. George's Cross on his shield or tabard. Equally, he might wear a brown gambeson and blue leggings with the shield painted green because he likes the color green. There wasn't really any sort of uniform they usually have to wear. Medieval soldiers, after all, had to supply their own shields, armor, horses, and equipment all around, with the one exception being arrow and crossbow bolts. So they were usually pretty free to wear whatever they wanted. They were able to tell friend from foe by sticking together and staying in formation, though there would likely have been some banners of their lord flying over the unit. Now, heraldry in the modern day has largely been abandoned, but there are still some European authorities which still enforce heraldic law. So, can you make your own? If you live in the British realm, you can register your arms with the College of Arms to make it official. Canada, Scotland, and a few other countries still maintain their colleges of arms. In the US, or other places where there's no heraldic authority, you are free to unofficially assume whatever arms you like, though certain best practices should be observed to remain tasteful. For instance, it would be bad to assume arms someone else is currently bearing, but Scotland is the only place I know of that actually enforces this rule. If you want to learn how to make your own arms, then join me in my next video and I'll show you how. Anyway friends, I hope you enjoyed this short introduction to heraldry. If you did, be sure to leave a comment down below and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. We'll be discussing tinctures, charges, and the blazon, and we'll be making a few of our own arms together. Anyway, that's all the time I have for today. Godspeed, friends.